Enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.
Welcome to And Good Company. I'm Sarah Fiedelholtz. We all know a great dinner party isn't really about the food. It's about the people seated around the table engaging in lively discussion. And Good Company gives you a seat at the table to enjoy smart and engaging conversations as they happen. I am very pleased to be in the company of Bob Cross, who is a regional, well-known abstract artist. Welcome.
Oh, thank you, Sarah.
So I think that at first we need to sort of address the issue because there's something different happening at this table that has never been happened before. Usually people are used to seeing me with all of my papers and notes and everything, but you actually have these note cards, index cards in front of you.
Yes.
So can you tell me about these index cards and what they do and how they relate to your art? And
I'd be happy to. You know, I started doing this years ago when I was working in New York. I was working on a project with David Hockney.
And David Hockney is one of the most well-known, would you call him an abstract artist?
You know, his work wanders into that zone. I think people know him for a lot of, as a photographer, as a photorealist, as an abstract expressionist. He's a interesting person who doesn't rest on his laurels. He just keeps right on going.
I mean, a lot of people would know him really for his photorealism, like at the restaurant counters and things like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was in New York.
Absolutely loves Picasso.
Okay.
And Matisse. And, and David had bought a copy of Picasso's Catalogue Raisonné, which is a photo illustrations of all his work. So it was basically just one painting after another. I mean, I think there's 17 volumes. And I got along really well with him, and he brought the books in, and we spent several days just flipping pages. And it was like a journal of Picasso's life. It was fascinating. And David loved drawing. I loved drawing. And we both kind of hooked onto this idea of drawing every day. And for me, it's easier to do it on index cards because I can put them in my shirt pocket. And if I'm waiting for a traffic light to change, or I draw.
And so it's sort of like a visual, like journal, right?
It is, right. But it's interesting the way I do it because it's very quick. So it ends up being really stream of conscious, very. If I'm waiting for a long time in a waiting room, they get more realistic.
Right. And then what do you do with these index cards?
I stack them up, and every 2 or 3 months, I lay them all out and start sort of focusing in on categories, like how are these alike? Where's this going? And it makes it easy to focus on my thoughts.
And why would you want to do that? I mean, what I'm getting at, this is part of your process.
These generate paintings.
Ultimately, your work as a painter.
If I'm getting a group of images that I really love, that's going to lead to a painting or a sculpture or a print.
But do you see that you're certainly, because, I mean, a lot of people say, they say that there's a lot of psychological meaning into doodling, and, if you look at, so are you certainly, in a way, this is a type of doodling, in a sense.
You could call it
right,
whatever. Yeah.
But as an artist, you're doing it, so it probably has more heft to it. But are you inclined to? Do you see patterns of like certain shapes or things that that you would just more naturally gravitate to draw, or while you're?
That's a good question. I find that over a number of years that I'm drawing the same thing over and over again. I mean. If I'm in the room, if the TV's on, if I'm driving, if I'm out somewhere.
I hope you're not doing this while you're driving.
No, I'm not doing it like if I'm stopped.
Right.
You get that traffic delay.
Right.
But a lot of things are kind of similar. So there is a funny repetition to this, and so then you start to see within that repetition like different moods or levels of your psyche sort of popping out.
Right.
If you're waiting in traffic, you know, you might be plugged into your, you know, more primal, you know, make this traffic move.
Right.
So,
Right. And so how many years have you been doing this?
I was working with David in '84.
Okay.
So since
So,
then.
and you've kept all of them, right? All of
Yeah,
these?
it's a lot of.
And then you also told me that I asked you if you date them, and you said you don't, but you actually could look at them and know what period or where you were, what evoked the type of drawing.
Yeah, I think it's kind of like a photograph, where if you see a photograph, it's like, oh, that was.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
so it's kind of, for me, for other people, it's
Right.
not. I don't know if that aspect of it is so important to me as it might be to somebody else.
And I think
So-
what's also important as this conversation that we're having is, because I just wanted to explain why you're going to be possibly drawing during this conversation, but
Okay.
is that you're not necessarily drawing literal things, because what you do and is more abstract, and
It
you are
is.
considered an abstract artist, an abstract painter, correct?
I am, yes.
Okay, so what you're sort of doing is not necessarily like literally drawing me or, you know, the table or the mug. It's more what that evokes, or maybe you're caught more of the circular or something like that, correct?
It's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of the essence of
Okay.
whatever is.
So let's, and this is getting you down to that essence. It's sort of like
Right,
awakening your subconscious.
This is what your interview looks like so far.
Okay, is that good or bad? I don't know. I
It's
think it'll be
pretty
interesting
good.
at the end.
It's not like
Okay,
this.
so at the end, we're going to spread out I'll take them and we'll spread them out, and then I'll get them photographed. So keep going. But okay, so let's just then talk about what is abstract art, and how is that different than other types of art? So let's put that within a context for people.
Abstract art grew out of, I think, the Industrial Revolution, the invention of photography, and changes in high-speed travel and communication, and then like different social economic factors that all sort of plug into that. We left an agrarian society where things moved at a real slow pace, I would
Right.
say, compared to today. And the invention of photography eliminated the need for artists to document things like wars and contracts.
George Washington crossing the Delaware.
Crossing the
right.
Delaware, marriages,
Right.
And also portraiture was a big part of that.
Right.
And over time, that spread into the media, and now we have the ability to not only take photographs, but films on our cell phones.
Right.
So,
But we also have the ability to manipulate those images as
oh
well.
yes, right.
So, right.
Which is what artists have done all along.
Okay.
So now everybody can do that.
Okay.
So where does that leave art? Yes, you can use photography, but the idea of abstraction, I think, if you look at history, Cubism and full abstraction began right about the time Einstein develops general relativity. The whole idea of what's real and what not is totally changed. Once we drop the atom bomb, it's just
Right.
a whole new world.
Right.
And so post-war art, abstract expressionism in America, a unique art movement developed in America.
And do you think it's also at the time, I mean, because a lot of people, like, I mean, you had Jackson Pollock in the 60s, and a lot of people, when they see what he did, you know, of splattering the paint and not using a paintbrush and sort of using other tools and seeing where the paint goes, you know, a lot of people will look at that and say, oh, well, I could do that. But at the time, and we always have to put it in the context of the time, because at the time nobody was doing that. But do you think that it also came out of this idea of experimentation with materials, or like when you think of Arp and he sort of would take those wooden blocks and drop them, or Kandinsky, who really wanted to get, I mean, in some ways, you're going back to the simplest of looking at drawing is getting something back to the shapes that you see, or the lines, you know, the simplest of forms. But do you think that that was also, that there was a big element of it initially that was part of experimentation, or what I believe is you have to know the rules to break the rules that sort of push this, or no, it's really completely separate from that?
I think, part of it is experimentation. Part of it's just an animal act. But my conversations with Robert Motherwell about
Okay,
this,
and Robert Motherwell, he was a well-known photographer, correct?
abstract expressionist.
Okay.
In the not quite a contemporary of Jackson Pollock's,
Okay.
but a little bit after.
Okay.
And but they were friends, and Robert told me that a big part of what all that the dripping paint, Jack the Dripper, was about that whole movement's reaction to conformity. They saw post-war America become very uniform and conform. Right. Now we call it a big box sort of
you look
mentality.
at like Levittown, you look at like these suburban, everybody house
gray
looked
flannel
the same.
suit.
Right. Organizational man, everybody was cookie cutter.
Right.
Yeah.
So that splattering of paint just flies right in the face of, gray flannel suit and, having a Buick in the garage. And, it was meant to get a reaction, and it did. The idea that, anybody could do this. Anybody's welcome to become a painter. Go ahead.
Right, exactly, right. But it's also, I think, one of the things that's interesting is because you had sort of these artists who were sort of giving it to the man, in a sense, in the 60s and 70s was really how the New York City art scene was really established. Was that in Soho, was that sort of anti-establishment, anti that what was currently in the museums or being societally accepted as fine art, right?
Yeah, but you'll see that all throughout history. Changes in art movements from high Renaissance into mannerism. That's a big shift. And so it's not uncommon. It's just, I think, artists are always trying to take the temperature of...
Or push the envelope, or right.
Right.
And so, but you did say that there are certain things that help to define abstract art, like color,
yes,
typically size,
texture, shape, form, and then the ability to have shaped canvases, to use unusual materials like light or water, or the material range.
Or
really.
Collage,
right.
Sculpture, and then also you have it, so it's not only in painting, it's also printmaking, sculpture, and right.
Right.
So you've been a professional abstract artist for your entire career, right?
Well, I hired an accountant in 1983.
Okay.
So since then.
Okay. And then really, not only are you sort of looking at abstract art and you're interested in it because it's the type of art that you do, but there's a bigger purpose of your interest in abstract art, especially as it relates to, let's just start with right now, local and regional abstract artists in Northeast Indiana.
Yes.
So talk about why you're interested in what else other artists are doing or looking at this body of work of both past and present abstract artists within our region.
I am able to, sort of see this historically. Thanks for bringing that up. If you look at T.C. Steele and the Hoosier Group about 1903, they did kind of the same thing that the Fort Wayne Museum is allowing us to do, which was to organize plein air painters working in Indiana into the Hoosier School.
And plein air painters are people who literally, they don't paint from, like a lot of times when you're doing like a portrait or something like cows or something, you take a picture of it and you work from the picture. But these are literally people who go out in the field and they, you see them setting up with their easel and stuff, and they're literally painting it at that exact moment in time.
The light, the atmosphere,
Right.
the
Okay.
yeah,
And that became very popular in Indiana
it did.
because you had you said the Hoosier artists, and then you also, that was big in the Fort Wayne art school.
Art school
right?
as well, right.
Okay. Which was
But-
sort of like the precursor to the Fort Wayne Museum of Art.
Right.
Which just celebrated it's celebrating its 100th
100
anniversary.
year.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
But in 1903, that was a pretty radical idea. Academic painting was done in a studio. The person would come in and sit for a portrait, or you would
Right.
set up a still life, or you would hire models to come in and act out whatever scene
Right.
you were doing.
And then we also have to think about what was important about that was, I mean, so you could show that it's all an evolution, was because it used to be that a lot of the painters, it was only about painting what you were there to paint, the intent. But then you had like people like Van Gogh and stuff who really started painting the room and the colors, and so they started to
Color
go
texture.
beyond just the frame of the work, which is
Right.
sort of like now when you see, like when they'll show you a picture of a studio. Like right now, people just see us on the
Right.
table. They don't see all the cameras and the lights. So if that's still part of the art. So then they go out so you can see more of it. So everything has gone through these evolutions. So this was at a time where, yes, everything was very stylized. You were in a studio, and then they said, okay, we're going to go out and literally paint where it happens. And so
Right.
that was the plain art movement, and that seemed to really be embraced also because it's very literal. I mean, it's very much landscape and pretty and
Right, but at the same time, Sarah, it's becoming much more abstract. What you not saying is that plein air painting was much more abstract than the academic art of the time, which was very crisp and
Right.
trying to be camera-like and realistic. And the plein air painting gets really loud, colorful, textural.
And also because they had to do it pretty quickly. Like,
Right,
I have,
quicker.
I have a cousin who does it. She paints
and it might
cows.
start raining.
Well, she says
So,
she
yeah.
has to do it very quickly because the cows may move, or
Or it's
one will
all-
sit down, or another cow comes in. So they also have to do it. It's not. It's taking. I also think what I say is you have to know the rules to break the rules. So
Right.
it takes all the rules that they know, but they have to sort of put it on steroids, and then so sometimes their lines aren't going to be as crisp or things like that, and that's how that came from, right?
Right. So what I'm trying to do is, with the Fort Wayne show, is to create the same sort of group.
Okay, so let's just stop there a second because
Okay.
we really haven't gotten to. I was sort of leading up to the show.
sorry.
No, that's okay. So let's just. So really, why I was trying to get you to show these movements and sort of the plain art and then abstract art is because of the fact that you actually are very visionary in creating this new exhibit at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. So tell me what the name of the exhibit is, its purpose, and what the show is about, and then we'll backtrack again.
Okay, it's called A Sense of Place, Abstract Art in Northern Indiana. And should I backtrack?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is an abstract interview, so we'll
Okay.
take it where it goes. Yeah, we can move back, forward, sideways. Sure.
Let's do that. So I'm in New York, working in fine art print publishing.
This is in the 70s,
in the
right? 80s,
early 80s.
Right. Okay.
Early 80s, and I'm working with 6 of the artists who were represented in the 9th Street exhibition, which was the groundbreaking landmark show which created abstract expressionism, created a dynamic that all of these abstracts became recognized within. And so they're telling me how this came about, and I'm just kind of soaking it up. And, these people were not recognized. They were unknowns. They were,
At the time.
for the most part, dirt poor.
And we're talking about, so this was Helen Frankenthaler,
Leo Castelli,
Roy
Robert
Lichtenstein.
Motherwell. Roy wasn't in that. He
Okay.
was later.
Okay.
But just a wide range of people.
Was Frank Stella part of that? No.
Frank was later.
Okay, he was late. I'm jumping. Okay. So you had these people that they were the first.
They were the first. And I don't think they realized what was going to happen.
Okay.
That, things would kind of explode. They'd become recognized for what they did, and the whole social economic impact of this was enormous. It basically shifted the focus of the art world from Paris to New York, in talking with him, it was just kind of it was more of a bunch of people sitting around at the Cedar Bar going, hey, we need to have a show. And it happened. They had a lot of help. But the repercussions were huge.
And so how do you fast forward that to 2021 and Fort Wayne, Indiana?
Well, I have been, my day job, I work in architectural interiors, and I noticed a big shift since the Great Recession from traditional or transitional homes into contemporary. And just like after a couple of years, you start to, oh, this is a thing. And the whole industry is going that way. What I'm not seeing is regional fine art married with these interiors. People are shopping online for art, which is ridiculous to me. I mean, why buy art from China?
Right. And it also, I think one of the important things also to understand of the shift, not only with the contemporary homes, was the idea of people could live with art and they could decorate their walls with art, and it can be a very important part of interior design.
It is, and also in a contemporary home, abstract art is a perfect marriage.
Right. Because a lot of times contemporary homes are more using more natural materials, a lot of them cement or marble. And also there was a period of time, really, you have to realize that, before the 90s, nobody's home had white walls. There was always that beige color or something. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the artists in the show that you're doing, the Sense of Place, Audrey Riley, she always told me that people's homes that have beige walls, it's because they're afraid of color. So it was so now you're seeing all of this. And at this time, so we're talking about in the early 2000s, if you had to say, because you said that the more fine art or training in like Fort Wayne, Midwest wasn't catching up to these trends, what would you say was the prominent, was it the plain art, or was there something else happening at that time that would have been considered like what was going on in terms of the art world?
I think in northern Indiana,
yes. Mm-hmm.
I think, that a lot of traditional art.
Okay.
I'm seeing a lot of that. Okay. And then plain art, I think, is always a good fit.
Right. Okay, so then...
But there was an awful lot of traditional farms, deer coming out of the woods. Right.
What I call like the sort of like the rural plain, the farmland. So you also put this all into perspective. It wasn't only that you noticed these trends and that you, as an artist, but also you also are a collector.
Oh,
and you collect a lot of regional and local artists.
I do.
Because I want to put all this in context, that all of this was going on in your head at the same time, while you're also, expressing it through your cards. So, and this really started in probably about 10 years ago, you would say, right?
Yeah, gradually.
Okay. So then you started to consciously seek out who we would maybe consider more on the fringe or periphery artists, who, because they weren't in that more accepted like plain art or of doing abstract art in the region, and then started to see that there was a lot of them. Or I'm trying to get you to get me from what you saw then to how we're now about to see the culmination of this vision in the show that you worked with Abby Leon as the curator to create, and you're really doing this to make a statement. So take me from that to now.
Okay, the architectural realization. I think the kicker was I saw an ad for statewide museum exhibit of plein air painting. And it just clicked. It's like, why isn't there a statewide exhibit of abstract art? I mean, that's kind of the bare minimum. I mean, it's not like crazy conceptualism.
Right. And so what was the answer that you found out to that question of why there isn't?
Well, I started asking. I went to my friend Mark Rushman, who's the senior curator at the Indiana State Museum, who was sponsoring that show, and said, got the full tour of the museum, which was great. At the end of it, I was like, Mark, why isn't there a statewide abstract show? And light bulb, because there should be.
And even here in Fort Wayne over the summer, we had that 3 days of that plain art where they
Right.
had a show. They had, I guess they also had professional classes, but then they had an art fair where you could buy the work, and then you saw them all over in parts of Fort Wayne, you know, setting up their easels and working.
Right.
So that was a very big intentional experience that we had here during the summer.
Right. So my thought was, Mark, why don't we do now what T.C. Steele did in 1903? And he said, yes, it's time. He said, the first thing you need, Bob, is to get the Fort Wayne Museum of Art on board for
So
this.
even though you saw this and he agreed, we still needed to go back to what people traditionally think is defining art or art movements or placing a value on a type of art, was you had to go to the museum. I mean, to have a museum recognize this, right?
Well, you needed outside validation
Okay.
for the idea.
And it wasn't
yeah.
a hard sell with the Fort Wayne Museum of Art because
They are so good. I mean, I think the Fort Wayne Museum is hands down the best in its class size for museums in this country.
and a lot of that has to do with Charles, who I
This-
actually had at this table a couple weeks ago.
Oh, he is wonderful. I mean, I think he's a visionary, what he's done there. So I sent a proposal to Charles, and
Did you send some index cards with little?
I did not. He's familiar with these. But our curator and my good friend Abby Leon had said, send it to Charles.
Right,
You know,
because she
he-
actually, 3 years ago, it was her first curatorial debut.
Right.
She actually did a one-man show with you at the museum, which
Yes.
is truly how I originally met you.
That's right.
Yeah.
And this first time you got a
I had, and I
index
still
card.
have it. I kept it.
So yeah, we have a history of working together, and
So Charles got this very brief sort of.
I'm
email.
not a writer,
Right.
so it was just kind of like a caveman writing a proposal for a show. And to my surprise, very quickly, within 2 months, I believe, I got a positive response, and he said, I'd like Abby to be the curator on this, and we started very quickly trying to make this move forward. And the idea was to start here rather than go statewide instantly. Let's do an abstract art show about northern Indiana.
Right, because it makes sense that the Fort Wayne Museum of Art is in Fort Wayne, and the Fort Wayne Museum of Art's focus is also American artists.
Yes.
Now, under Charles, there's also been one of the museum's interests is in abstract art, and
Yes.
partly because they also got a very huge, the whole David Shapiro collection, and that was like 800 pieces of his. So.
Right, and I believe they have the Stephen Sorman
Yes,
archives
yes,
too, which
right.
is fabulous.
Okay.
I've worked with
so
Stephen.
so Charles said, yes, we're going to do this.
Mm-hmm.
And then obviously the first artist that you could put on the list to possibly be in the exhibit is you, because this is your medium. And although you weren't doing this for self-serving purposes. So then how did you start to figure out or find the other abstract artists within the region? Or did you already have that because of the fact that you were a collector or?
In part, yeah, because I'm a collector, but also because, you know, I travel. I'm always in museums and galleries, and I get to know some of the people. So right off the bat, Michael Porman. I wanted Michael to be in it.
And why?
Michael is kind of a senior statesman in regional abstract, you know, in this area, and so I thought that was important, and I love his work. He's a great guy, and he knows a lot of people, so started bouncing ideas with Michael and Abby. She travels, she's very familiar. We just kind of started making a list, and I was taking recommendations from some people that I feel are very knowledgeable.
And you also really wanted to make sure that it was sort of like you talk about the elder statesmen like Michael Porman, but then you
Right.
also have the younger, on the younger end, which would be like a Theophilus Smith or Fresh Laundry.
Right.
You also wanted to make sure that, so you had a diverse of ethnicities, gender, age, because one of the things about, I think, abstract art is that it's relevant to everyone at any one stage in, who are attracted to it as an artist.
Yes.
So that was really important to you, correct?
It was important to get a good cross-section of not just that, but also styles of abstraction, to have printmaking and sculpture and painting and drawing and collage, and represent as much of that as well. But but also to have people from all ages and backgrounds who are really out there doing it.
Right.
And are recognized, whether they're young or old, and are really trying to make a statement. So a lot of factors went into this.
But the other thing that I think is really important is in thinking about the name of the show, because it wasn't just like you did On View, abstract artists. You did a sense of place.
Yeah.
And why is that important in terms of what you're trying to do with this show, but also with your bigger vision for what you want to do with abstract art and its influences, both not only in Indiana, but also throughout the Midwest?
Right. I already have made a name for myself in the international market through printmaking, my work with that.
And also as in your own right, as a
artist,
as a renowned and collected. I mean, you are a collected artist
internationally.
Right.
Yes.
Yes.
So, but I live here. Through my day job, I became more and more familiar with what makes housing unique here. I do a lot of work in historic housing, so it's much different here than it is in California or New York.
Right, and that has to do a lot with the style of housing, the architectural influences, the materials used, because a lot of it is, as we say, it is about environment, and
and the crafts.
Right.
So, and so I wanted to bring that into the art that's made here, because I think we have a unique style.
So you do believe that there is a sensibility or style to abstract art that's made in Indiana or in the
Yes.
Midwest?
Midwest.
Okay.
but-
And what would you say are some of those signature elements that would, when you look at, you could say, I wonder if that person who made that artist is from the Midwest? What would you say some of those are?
I think that, well, to begin with, if you live in the Midwest, you have a much closer relationship to nature, in addition to intellectual life, than you do if you live in New York. And I remember when I was working in New York, there was kind of a joke around the studio that most abstract artists were anti-naturalists, because I literally knew artists who would not walk across grass because they found that offensive.
Right.
They wanted to walk on
Right.
concrete.
Right, or like people like me, like when I lived in New York City, Central Park was the perfect amount of nature for me.
Right.
I didn't feel like I needed to go hiking or go out and commune in Vermont or that was perfect. I mean, I got my
Here it
fix.
is, right.
I got my
Yes,
fix from
right.
the concrete jungle, and I love that urbanism, and that was just enough nature.
All
for
you
me.
needed.
Right. But here, yes, I mean, I also joke that there's so much more of abundance of it, so it's more things are spread out. I mean, and that was true with Chicago as well.
Chicago, any major
So
metropolitan.
yes, so it was, I mean, it wasn't like, yes, you could have interactions with nature on a very easy basis as opposed to having to go up to 56th Street and make an appointment to go to Central Park to see something.
Right, you don't have to get on the subway
Right,
here.
okay.
So,
All right, so that's the first thing, okay.
right, second, just the weather patterns. I mean, if you look at art from Miami, which you're very familiar with, probably a lot brighter, bolder colors than what you're seeing
Yeah, it's
here.
like when I first came to Fort Wayne, well, two things. My impressions were, this was 4 years ago, so this was before all the murals.
Right.
I thought, oh, it's very brown. And what you don't realize is that the sun bleaches out the asphalt. So even the lines that divide on a road, the different lanes, it is so much brighter because the sun is so much stronger and it bleaches out everything. So everything in Miami, it's like as if they changed it to LED lights there before they've now changed them in the Midwest. So
Right.
it's just that intensity and by the nature of that. So yes.
Right. And I live in Elkhart, and we get lake effect. So
You get a lot
almost
more fog.
snow, gray days.
Right.
So there's just, a dry, sunny day where I live, wow.
Right.
So I think that affects
So
how
that would have
you,
your influence in color choices, maybe. Do you think
Right.
it has do you think also the type of maybe materials that are used, or
Right.
the type of texture that you're trying to go for?
I think
I would
there's-
think in LA or Miami, it's much more I don't know why I think this, but in LA, I think it's more like it would be high gloss or like car paint.
Slick.
The slick.
Slick.
Yeah, like I could see
Right.
abstract art with enamels. Like because that just says to me
right.
slick and cool and shiny.
Glossy
Where
and-
where
right.
here I would not think they would be. I think they would be more like acrylic paint that's like harder and dries a little crackly and
It's okay to be textural and crude
Yeah,
here. I mean,
yeah.
I've had people describe me as a cave painter. I mean,
but you're not literal in that sense of trying like a cave painter who was literally trying to tell you what cave figures, like what was going on. I mean, just
but just the materials
Right,
and the
right, yeah,
look.
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So you start. So there's definitely, you believe, a way that we could identify abstract artists that are from the Midwest
in
because
a
of these certain things.
sort of
Okay.
Apollonian, Dionysian
Okay.
mindset.
All right.
So those are two elements. I think we could go on and say that a lot of people I know that work here have a strong abstract expressionist
And what is abstract expressionism? Because versus what we were calling abstraction, right? Well, it's all abstraction.
Oh, right.
So
Yeah,
let's
abstraction.
just explain what is abstraction, and then what is the difference between, because you have abstract impressionism and then just abstract art. So give me a little understanding of that.
I think abstraction is, I think, and it moves across a lot of fields, but a sense that in today's world, we don't have to be so literal about everything. We can present the essence of an idea, and we can digest it
Right.
as,
So we don't have to be intentional. Like
Right.
I think sometimes when I taught nursery school, and you would put out, let's say we put out red, yellow, and blue paint, okay?
Yeah.
And we just had on the easel, and we let the kids sort of, and the biggest mistake we would always make is say to the child when they're done, what did you make?
Oh.
And a lot of times they didn't make anything. They were just experimenting, like they were learning. Maybe we put out a different type of brush, or they were realizing, oh, if they mix yellow and blue, they'll get green.
Right.
And so they may have been like, oh, well, what? So, but we intentionally, and even I think even we do this with abstract art itself, is we need to give things meaning. We need to think that somebody made this for a purpose. It's even like when you took English lit, American lit in college, and you're reading the story, and they're saying, now, why did the author name the person this, and what was the intent here? And sometimes you're thinking, come on, didn't he just write the story?
Well, I think that gets to the heart of abstraction. When you see that amazing sunset, you don't feel the need to quantify and qualify it. You just stop your car and go, wow. I think that's kind of the beauty of abstraction.
Right. And I think also, in some cases, like I said, I think some cases there is the abstraction of experimentation with materials, but also I think there is the idea of abstract, of getting something down to the essence. Like I happen to love Pablo Picasso, who does these single line like he never lifts his pen, and he can do, like my mother happened to like dachshunds, and he did this single line, and you can see how the line moved to create the outline of a dachshund, and he did this like with a pelican, and so
human figures.
Right, or
it's
like
amazing.
a lot of like my favorite sculptor is Constantine Brancusi.
Oh, right.
And he would take like a bird, and he would just take it down to the simplest of lines, and almost to a degree of abstraction to blur what that literal two lines are. So I think that there is some of that drives abstract art, of trying to get to the essence, But in a lot of ways, I also think it may be getting to the essence of your own thoughts or feelings or expression or whatever moves you, right?
Yeah. Helen Frankenthaler always used to say she was trying to get to the sublime, and I just thought, well, that's right. I mean, what's that thing that we look at and we just all go, wow, whether it's a Géricault painting or
Right.
it's
And I think it's also trying to, give that visual vocabulary or meaning to things that you can't describe, like joy or sadness, and I think it's also that we use, and one of the artists who also is participating in the exhibit, Audrey Riley,
Yeah.
told me that she really likes metaphor because, if you say to someone, it's joy is like, that kind of belly aching laugh. Like we use metaphors to explain things because we don't have the right words.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that in a sense, abstract art is sort of the visual metaphor for things that maybe we can't say, like love or joy or, whatever deep things that are running around our subconscious or.
Yeah, for me it's poetry. I mean, if there were a literary equivalent. When I read poetry and it's good, it's just like, it's abstract, but there's this, I have a sense of
Right.
it might be this.
So we
and-
actually could, instead of having lines or stanzas of a poem, we actually could lay out some of your cards and we could decide, like, how a haiku has 5 words, 7 words, and then 3?
Right.
So we could take your drawing, we could put 5, and then we could put 7, and we could put 3.
That's a fun way to,
and then we could almost create, it's like abstract, it's a visual poem.
Right. For me, I like Tonka poetry.
What is, okay.
A little bit longer than a
Okay.
haiku. I think is it 24?
And
Lines,
not
or-
in poetry, it's not like every 2 lines have to rhyme. and-
Right, yeah.
Right, yeah.
So
Okay.
yeah, that would be a fun way to look
That
at
could be
these.
for the next
Okay,
next show.
we're doing
so,
this.
So then, so then you sort of, and how big was the list when you originally started and got all this input and stuff? How many?
My list was about 50 people.
Okay.
I don't know how long Abby's was.
Okay. And did you? And these were really, and they were across the spectrum. I mean, some were maybe more starting out, but yet had some recognition, and some were very established, right?
Right, and it was also across northern Indiana. So what you have here in Fort Wayne, quite a bit different than what you find in Elkhart and Warsaw, and then when you get over to Michigan City and Valparaiso, whole different,
Okay. So were you
set of
surprised
influences.
that there were so many that, because like again, it's not really talked about, they're not, and also, when you sort of bring things together in number and you start seeing how many there really are, it does help to define it more than a trend, that
It
it's a
does.
movement, because
Right.
I always joke as a journalist, you need 3 for a trend. So if you want to tell me that eggplant, this color eggplant, is a trend, okay? So I need you to tell me in 3 ways that it has become ubiquitous. So let's say the Mixmaster, you can get it in this color. You can get a car in this color.
Right.
And then it would have to be something like it was chosen as Pantone's color of the year.
Okay.
3 things. Then I've got a trend. I can absolutely tell you that this color aubergine is absolutely a trend.
And then you have to see it in your best friend's house.
Right, exactly. But to define a trend, that's
Right.
because otherwise, if it's just one, it's a fad.
Right.
And then if you have, then what you have is more than 3, like 50. Then it becomes, in terms of marketing, it becomes like a lifestyle. So it's here to stay. It's more of a movement.
Right.
So really, what you saw was that what started as a trend with architecture and everything, and when you really start to look at it, that this was a movement of a type of art that maybe wasn't, it was happening even though everybody's attention in the Midwest was looking over here, this was still going on. And now you want to divert that attention, correct?
This wasn't being recognized.
So the tension, what it didn't get. So you got this all together, this whole list,
Right.
and then what did that say to you?
That we've got a lot of great people. I was really, really impressed, across all those spectrums we've talked about. I'm just overwhelmed at how many good people are here and haven't left. And I think part of it is you can work from home now. You don't have to be in New York or LA.
Right. It's the same
You
like being a
can-
journalist.
you
When
can
I started,
commute, right.
you had, if you wanted to be a magazine editor, you had to be in New York.
Right.
You don't have to do that anymore. And like
No.
one of the women who's in the show, Mary Pat Wallen.
Wallen, yeah.
So she said to me, so she's in Warsaw.
Right.
But her art on an international.
Right.
I mean, her art is in the top shows and on the best yachts and we're talking multi-million-dollar yachts.
Right.
Her art, and so she jokes that she doesn't go anywhere, but her art does.
Right. I mean, she could be working out of Italy or France.
Yeah.
You know.
But because of her life choices and whatever, she's in
Warsaw.
Warsaw.
Right.
Okay. So so then you sort of got together, you know, Abby, Charles, you, and you sort of, now, the other thing we have to think about is that you have a finite amount of space in the museum. So that was the first thing. And also because abstract artists have a tendency to go big.
Right.
Because they have lots of thoughts and ideas.
Right.
Okay. So those were two things you had to take into account for
Yeah.
this show.
So we were actually in the space. We had been assigned Gallery 2. And so we actually sat in that space, walked around, measured, and sort of figured, well, what's, you know, realistically the biggest painting we might expect or hope for, and then how many artists do we have? How many can we fit in the space? And then it got brutal because we wanted everybody to be
Right.
in it.
And then the other thing was Abby really wanted original pieces.
Oh yeah.
So these pieces are not just things like you went through your archive. They wanted something that you would reflect
all
this time.
created work for this show, which also fantastic.
But and that's a big ask, because it's sometimes like one of the artists, Sayaka Gans. I mean, she actually has been working on. She's doing this life-size horse, and then
Right.
she has a commission she's doing with Blue Jacket. So in
Right.
between, you sort of came in with an ask. And so that, I mean, people don't realize that it's not just as simple to say to an artist, oh yeah, and by the way, we need 2 new pieces.
Well, I was on board with that because, I mean, you should see my schedule. I'm extremely busy, but it was also, it meant a lot to me to do something for this show. It was really a great opportunity that Charles provided.
Right. So at the end
Again,
so at the end of the day, there's 13 artists,
right.
and it's all new original works.
Yes.
And it's bringing together a sense of place of
Yes.
abstract artists, but also abstract art.
Yes.
To give it sort of this, let's put some attention on it, in northern Indiana.
Yes.
And the hope of this is, though, that it's the first exhibit of something much bigger. And
Well,
so,
yes.
literally and figuratively.
Uh-huh. And I mean, in my, you know, wildest dreams, I would hope that this is the beginning of something like plein air painting in Indiana, that this expands into something really fantastic where it's, you know,
Right.
recognized and accepted.
And it's not that far-fetched. Like, it's not thinking like, okay, Bob, in your abstract thinking, we need to bring you down a little bit back down to the real world where we are, right? More realistic, because of the fact that, like you said, when you look at it in history about certain periods, and you were talking about like in Florence with
Oh, yeah.
that movement, but also really is understanding how the art movement was created in New York, or even if you think about even in Miami. I mean, Art
Right.
Basel was created. It was
Right.
an intentional, and now with Art Basel, it's not, and that was really from a show in Switzerland, but what Miami did was they took that, and now it's the satellite shows,
Huge.
it's the 11 shows around it.
It's a destination.
Right, and they have
Yes.
to find that. So really, and it started, I mean, I remember when it started 20 years ago. It was this very small show in a convention center.
Right.
And it was sort of a relationship with this show from Basel, Switzerland. And
We did that show in New York.
okay,
Yeah.
so what you're saying, there is a history of precedence that this can be done.
Right.
And that this is exactly how it starts.
Right.
So we could be sitting here, how many years from now do you think we could be sitting here and the whole conversation could be about looking at abstract art and the value and the importance, and its recognition within the Midwest?
I think our hopes and expectations are to turn this into a statewide show in 4 to 5 years. So 5 years from now,
That would be statewide.
right,
And then
we
probably-
could begin this
right.
conversation again, like, is it taking root?
Right.
And but
And
all
maybe,
these,
and maybe it is something that just the state of Indiana should own. I mean, maybe we don't want to invite the
no.
people from Illinois and Ohio, you know?
well, yeah, I think we can do this ourselves. But the artists are already here. It's already here. It's just a matter of like putting it in a
And
room.
bringing them all together, curating it.
Exactly,
And so when people go to see this exhibit with the 13 artists, and they're going to see lots of different mediums and expression, and what are the pieces of advice? Like one, I would say mine would be, don't try to look for something. Like, don't try to think what were they trying to create, or, you know, like what we have this tendency of what is it or why. But sort of let it just enter you, I guess, in a way. I mean, so what would be your things that somebody, that if, what would you give the directive? Like if you were in the person's ear as they're coming in the door to see the exhibit, A Sense of Place at the Fort Wayne Museum of Art, what is it that you would want to tell them?
Just open your mind. Just feel, you know, the ability to enjoy color in its pure form, texture in its pure form. Is this something that's worth your attention? And if
also
it
think-
is, stop and look at it.
Right, and I also think really appreciating the commitment and dedication and time
Quality,
and
yes.
investment that these artists place in believing in this, and also, yes, the high level of quality. But what you don't realize is they're invested in it. This is not a like one-off or sort of, yeah, I'm going to try. I mean, when I have talked to a lot of the artists,
Right.
they are absolutely dedicated, committed, and invested in this belief of what they do and how they do it, and sort of have, you know, they really like put the flagpole in the cement for abstract art.
I guarantee this will speak to you, that, you know, this is something that will make a positive impression. And I've seen some of the early, and I'm
So literally, we should people. So going back to what is abstract impressionism, is literally we're going to turn that on its head with this exhibit and say, let there be an impression of the abstract art on you. How does that sound?
Thank you for that.
Okay, so I think that's what we, so just let it, whatever that impression is,
You nailed it.
that's what it is. So that's what we're doing. We're making that that twist of it. So, and speaking of the twist, and now you'll probably be busily starting to draw, because
Okay.
at the end of each And Good Company program, I ask guests the same 12 questions that French novelist Marcel Proust popularized in a Victorian parlor game.
Okay.
So I think as you're thinking of your answers, this is why I have a feeling you'll be sketching. What is your favorite word?
It's going to be mystery.
What is your least favorite word?
You have to do this.
What turns you on spiritually, creatively, or emotionally?
Color.
What turns you off creatively, spiritually, or emotionally?
Small minds.
What sound or noise do you love?
Opera.
What sound or noise do you hate?
Table saws.
What profession other than your own would you like to attempt?
I've always wanted to be a rigger.
Like an oil rigger? Or a,
People who move enormous things from one place to another.
what profession would you not like to do?
Doctor. How am I doing?
You got a couple more. What do you consider your greatest achievement?
Having raised a daughter.
Who, living or dead, would you most like to have a conversation with?
Joseph Beuys.
And Joseph Beuys, why?
He's was a conceptual sculptor, and I just love his work, everything about him.
How would you like to die?
In bed.
If heaven exists, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
What would you like to eat?
Well, I want to thank Bob Cross, abstract artist, for having a seat at our table. But I think that we did really well on the engagement aspect of you, because you were holding your pencil and you started to make some things.
Not much.
But you didn't. And so you left ours really of where we started. So is that an indication that you were very engaged and really, or is it, because I don't think you do this out of boredom,
Right.
but I'm just, did I do well on the fact that you
I
didn't?
didn't have time to draw much,
Okay.
so you did good.
All right, great. So I want to thank you again for
Thank
Enjoy a
you.
Seat. And I definitely think that people want to check out A Sense of Place
Please go.
at
Yes.
the Fort Wayne Museum of Art. And it's about Northeast Indiana abstract artists.
December 4th through March 13th.
And there are 13 both local and regional artists whose work will be on view, including your own.
Yes.
And you can learn more about Ann Good Company and all the other great conversations we have had at anngoodcompany.info. And we look forward to next week when you can again enjoy a seat at the table for great conversation and good company.